Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with mid-century pop?
Well, I'm familiar with mid-century modern furniture, and
I love that.
Familiar.
Did I see you at West Elm at the mall over the weekend?
You may
sitting
have.
in front of that beautiful credenza.
You may have it at the Future Antiques, yeah. And I'm familiar with Taylor Swift. So is that what we're talking about? Mid-century modern furniture.
We're not
Taylor
quite at
Swift,
the middle of this century yet.
mid-century
I
pop?
think they're talking about last. Let's figure that out, though. It's interesting.
Okay. Midnight's is overrated.
Swifties, rise up.
I'm Adam Neely.
And I'm Peter Martin.
And you're listening to the You'll Hear It podcast.
Music advice coming at you.
Coming at you today, sponsored by Open Studio. Peter, we're talking about mid-century pop, but let's try not to make this episode mid. You know what I'm saying?
You know what I'm saying? Let's elevate the game, as we like to say.
Yeah.
No, I think we will. This is one, look, we're going to react to something that's out there that is kind of prescient.
Prescient, yeah.
Is that correct?
That is not a mid word. I love that the word mid has now turned into a derogatory thing. Oh, it's mid.
Yeah.
It's just the mid-century.
That's right. Middle of last century.
People are going to be like, 20th century was so mid.
Yeah. Well, I love this term mid-century pop that I first encountered in this video. So we'll get into that maybe a little bit. But just to set things up, there is a video called Is Laufey Jazz that Adam Neely...
Excuse me?
Laufey.
Got it.
I believe that's the correct... That's as good as I can do right now. Laufey is a wonderful young artist that I just heard... My bad, my ignorance. Somehow I totally missed her music until I saw this video.
Yeah.
That I think is cool in a way, though. Like Adam Neely is one of, I think, the certainly one of the better music commentarians
100%.
on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's just getting better. I think to me this video is getting really
better,
good.
Which is annoying.
It
Adam,
is.
It's
It is a little
how
annoying
good you
because
are
some
at
of his
it.
others. I mean, all of his stuff's been good, but like this, I think is just he really nails it. And this is normally the kind of title that I would just be like, even if I knew who it was, I would just roll my eyes. It'd be like, is Samara Joy jazz? I mean, just it's not that interesting to me,
Yeah.
these labels and going back and
We've
forth.
talked
with
about
that.
how, and I think from our perspective, as trying to learn the music and trying to just, become better musicians, our stance is always labels aren't super helpful for that,
Yeah.
I have seen the first, I think, third or maybe half of this video.
Okay.
I haven't seen the whole thing yet, but from what I gather from what Adam talks about in this video, though, it's more breaking down the narrative behind some of these things. And, like it or not, the marketing of the music of what we're playing is part of what we're doing.
Right.
And so when someone like Laufey kind of pops off, and similar to in 20 years ago when Norah Jones was popping off, and there was pushback about, is that jazz or whatever?
Yeah.
Listen, anybody who's playing real instruments and writing great songs and playing great songs, I don't really care what you call them.
Right.
But I get it, how it's the marketing of this and how this is kind of perceived by people who are outside of the community is very interesting.
Yeah.
And can be annoying for the people who are inside the community.
But it's kind of like, I know, and I don't know if I'm mellowing with age to this issue because the is blank jazz.
I mean, how many times are we going to see
jazz,
this in our lifetimes where it's it happens all the time?
I know. Is bitches brew jazz? How long is this? Is bebop jazz?
Right.
There was a time when they were saying that.
Should we even use the word jazz?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm chafing to this whole is this jazz because we don't even love the term jazz either. But if you think about other things, I mean, do tennis players, recreational tennis players sit around and say, is pickleball tennis? They'd be like, no, absolutely it's not.
100%
Do we
not.
hate pickleball?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
So, but I don't think this is coming from that. And I did watch the whole video. I made a couple of notes and some things I can maybe just take you and the listeners through that I thought were important.
Just before we get to that,
yes,
I just
please.
want one really important thing. I did not mean to upset the pickleball.
Well, he got scared. Look at him. He got scared.
They are
there.
rabid.
Yeah.
They are rabid.
Well, just to let you know, Kelly and I are becoming close. We are pickleball curious. I think I've mentioned that before on the pod. Just so you know. So if that's going to be a problem for our musical or professional friend
I don't
or
know
personal
if I can
friendship,
work
let me
here
know
anymore.
now.
If you guys,
We're not all in yet, but
it seems like a lot of fun. I'm delaying playing pickleball because it
sound is
seems like
annoying.
it's something I would get addicted to.
Yeah.
But if you've ever played tennis in an indoor bubble, like
Yeah.
in the winter,
Yeah.
and you're next to pickleball courts, you might as well be next to a shooting range. It's the worst.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
the worst. Anyway,
Speaking of bubble, let's pull up Adam Neely because Adam Neely, just like us, kind of lives in a little bit of a YouTube jazz commentary bubble, I would say. But let me let him sort of set up the video for
Don't
those
we
of you
all,
that haven't
Peter?
seen it.
Don't
and
we
look,
all?
we're going to link below to this highly recommended video. That
I mean,
whether
we're one
you agree with it or not.
We're
this is
one
a
to
really-
talk with our clear wall behind us where we talk jazz piano in here.
That's
but, yeah,
right.
Our
jazz
own little bubble.
piano.
Yeah.
Piano. Here we go.
So as we all know, jazz is dying. But at least we have Laufey, the Icelandic-Chinese multi-instrumentalist, jazz singer, and songwriter who is currently dominating the jazz charts. She's very much the Norah Jones of Gen Z. If streams are to be believed, she is the most famous living jazz musician.
A lot of streams.
Okay, so that's interesting. I think that Spotify, since they're classifying her as jazz, they're either doing a service, a disservice, or they're just sort of the algorithm is plugging in where they think she goes. How does that work?
As you know, Spotify doesn't classify anything. Her record label or team has classified her as jazz.
I think all her stuff is self-released. I don't know.
Well, then she's classifying herself as jazz.
No, but I think Spotify does. They have genres.
Yeah, but you pick the genre when you upload your stuff. Yeah, of course you do. Yeah. Have you?
So what if you?
Have you ever uploaded music on Spotify?
I mean, I think so.
No, you do.
Had
like if you use any service that does it, I don't know what she's doing. Maybe they put her into the jazz category. But usually you self-identify as an artist when you upload.
So when they say here verified artist, they're not saying verified genre. Nobody's verifying that it. Like, what if you put heavy metal and say this is jazz?
Again, genres are bullshit, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, gotcha.
But
we here in the benighted jazz community are so thankful for our new savior.
Tongue-in-cheek or authentic? Foreshadowing of some of his beliefs in this video.
I think so, yeah.
Which is unfortunately the narrative that's currently being pushed.
So this and is I what would I like already, is that the narrative that's being pushed. That's what we're talking about. Like, to be clear, I've heard her before, like during the pandemic. I heard her when she was just like not blown up this much. Yeah. She's great. She's terrific at what she does. Talented. Like Norah Jones. Yeah. Super talented at what she does, has a real vibe, has a real point of view. So just want to caveat, anything we say is not to diss her because she's awesome. But more about the narrative around it, I think.
Yeah, and this whole, like, there's two things. There's the, is such and such saving jazz? We've seen that story over and over again.
It's so boring.
And is this jazz? Yeah.
So both are
But you know what? It's just like, is pickleball killing tennis? It is interesting to people, actually. I'm just saying.
Only if you're...
Take the opportunity in this video to very lightly push back on that narrative and put it into some badly needed historical context.
Okay, so
where's this coffee cup from?
You like that?
I do like that cup.
So that's kind of the intro, and I think that Adam does a wonderful job. This is exactly what he does in the whole video. I'll show you a few. We're going to jump around, but he really does place this in historical context, which I think is super useful. And if some of Laufey's fans see this, I think it'll be really, really, really interesting. I mean, I learned some stuff for sure. So I'm going to jump ahead. Unless do you have any thoughts so far?
No, okay. It's a great. But I do as a YouTuber.
Yeah,
this is a top shelf setup.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, it's very look, it's how long is this video? 33 minutes. If you're going to invest 33 minutes, it's nice if what they say at the beginning is what they actually do, what they do. Yeah. It's not about if you agree with it or not. You might agree with some things or not. That's not what, I mean, let's get out of this echo chamber where everybody's like, I'm a pickleballer, I'm a tennis, you know what I'm saying?
This is some inside baseball here, but that's a great cabin on the mountain for the...
Shh, don't give that away. Okay, don't give that away. Cool. Gala, we'll get to that later.
Okay.
Scat solos. Here we go. Compare the vocal improvisation from Chet Baker's Do It the Hard Way to Laufey's solo break on From the Start.
Look at that.
It's a little different, but you can hear some of the same things, like the arpeggiation to the flat 9 on the B flat 7.
I mean, isn't that also a Dizzy Gillespie thing, too?
Yeah, and
from Donna Lee, right?
Yeah, a bunch of people have done it. But I mean, I think, and it's interesting. I don't know why he referenced specifically Chet. He might say that in the video, Chet Baker, because I think it's because Laufey had talked about being influenced by it or whatever. So I don't think that was necessarily saying like he invented that. But I think that this part is interesting because it's talking about like what makes jazz, and improvisation is one of the things traditionally that we associate with jazz. So is she improvising here? Is it even important? You know what I mean? Let's keep playing.
16th note articulation, the turn.
Like, is there something?
But I mean, let's zoom back. That's bebop vocabulary right there.
Yeah.
And that's an audience of 5,000 in Manila singing it back to Laufey as she scats Chet Baker licks.
That's pretty cool, actually.
That's wild. It's Taylor Swift does bebop. What a time, man.
I mean, I'm here for that.
Yeah, and so obviously it's not improvised in the sense of that, well, it could have been improvised, and then she does it the same way each time, but that doesn't make something jazz or not make something jazz in my mind. People might say, okay, there's Art Tatum versions of tunes that he played that were almost identical the next time. I don't think anyone's going to argue that.
What we're seeing here?
What?
We're seeing Gen Z take like their filter through what's been done.
Really?
I think so.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Or do you? Let's keep watching this part. This part's
wondering how to make this intro spicy.
Sorry, by that I mean the process of how she's probably learning how this music is unfolds is from YouTube videos.
Interesting. Right.
Probably some of Adam's, probably some of ours, like probably everybody who's making YouTube videos about bebop and about that. And people this age, that's how they're learning everything.
Right.
Yeah.
But so that affects Laufey and any other artists that are putting their music out there, putting their artistic vision. But for her fans, the 5,000 in Manila that are singing along probably don't have any of that reference point.
No, not yet.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's interesting.
Incorporating this vocabulary organically in modern pop music seems to be something that she really is passionate about. For example, check out the 7, flat 7, 6, flat 6, 5 potential chromatic line and the underscoring of Sarah Vaughan's Misty.
Walk my way. Too much
Laufey alters the melody in her own version of Misty and sings the line "Too much in love" with this chromatic line.
Too much in love.
I mean, that's very Sarah Vaughan-esque. I know he's going to have Ella Fitzgerald here.
Jazz greats have used similar chromatic vocabulary on the tune.
Following you.
I'm here for that.
Laufey has talked.
So, okay. Obviously, she's taking these things. She's got a beautiful voice. She's taking some very specific vocabulary that a vocalist would do that is kind of improvisational, right? But then placing it in, kind of this modern context that's a real throwback kind of a thing for a lot of things beyond just these specific harmonic things that he's pointing out or that we would hear, things like that evoke another time, the same way with her clothes and the lyrics and all these kind of things. So there's definitely a nostalgia part to it as well. But I think for us as musicians, we look at that and we're like, oh, that's just that descending diminished to the major. Like, does it actually mean anything in terms of like, is this jazz? Is this mid-century pop like he's going to put forward?
I don't. I think what it means is it evokes this time period, right?
Yeah.
You don't hear modern pop singers do a lot of that. Yeah, the way that Ella would do that, right? So it evokes that whole, and I'm sure there's actually some pop standard singers or mid-century pop, or whatever you want to call it,
right,
that do this a similar thing. But that's very Sarah Vaughan-ish, the way she sang it specifically, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so that brings up a good thing. We're going to jump now to sort of how. Ooh, look who's heading up there.
Wynton shows up here.
Wynton.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we're going to jump to the question of, so her spoiler alert, she has a lot of young fans, as you would expect. Do they catch these references, but when they're hearing this, like, is this a connector to the culture that Laufey is providing to her young
Every time you
listeners?
say her name, it's a tightrope walk.
Right, it is. But I mean, like, there's a connection to the culture, i.e. jazz, and then there's also like the picking out a little bit. It's like, I'm a chef. Give me a little bit of these Thai spices.
This is what I'm saying. So if you take someone who's our age, right, like Harry Connick, right, who I would say is someone who's certainly crossed over.
Old AF.
He's certainly crossed over into a pop realm several times. I mean, I actually just watched the other night When Harry Met Sally for the first time in like 10 years.
Yeah.
It was on Max or whatever. And it was, first of all, it's a hilarious movie.
It's a funny movie.
It's a great, it's probably the best rom-com of all time. It's got to be, right? Rob Reiner's
I hated every rom-com after that.
But music's killing. Harry's killing, crushing.
Mark Shaman did all the arranging.
Did all the arrangements, all the orchestration.
Bad cat.
But so Harry is, I would say, like, in the same, like the same stratosphere as this, as Laufey, right? As the same, like, we're crossing over, we're taking from the past. However, here's what is the difference. It is the digital age, right?
Right.
So Harry, the only way to get that is through connection through people like Ellis Marsalis.
Yeah.
Right? And the people in New Orleans that he grew up just around physically. And while you said Laufey went to Berkeley, so there obviously is still a connection to the lineage and the musicians that are there, you can, with everything at your fingertips and everything just a YouTube click away, find anything and develop and like cultivate your style. It's almost a little bit removed from the generations. Like there's like one step we're further step removed. By the way, this is not a criticism. This is how things go, right? This is how it goes. So now she's probably a generation or 2 generations younger than Harry Connick, if she's Gen Z.
Yeah. One generation.
Right. So there's a generation, there's millennials between. He's Gen X, right?
Yep.
So of course it's going to be a little bit detached from Harry Connick, who is I believe studied directly with Ellis, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Since he was young. And James Booker.
Right? So those cats were from the generation that made all the stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. It's just really, really interesting.
Well, and I think too, there's this Gen Z, and we've seen this in looking at some, and again, this is not I don't even remember which generation, actually. Young folks coming up in the music now, anywhere from 9 years old up to 30 or whatever you want to say arbitrarily. But it's they have such a closer connection in some ways to hearing every version of phrasing over Misty immediately, and from studying this stuff and getting that without having to go or be able to see Ella Fitzgerald. Diane Reeves sings some of this stuff. She doesn't necessarily do that, but she got it. Yeah, she also sat and subbed for Ella Fitzgerald when she couldn't make a gig when she was a teenager in Denver and had to literally step into her shoes. It's just a different time.
It's almost like the further away you get from sort of the source material, you're kind of picking and choosing your vibe that you want to take from a wider swath. So Laufey has she has Norah Jones and Harry Connick and people like that to pull from, and from the 70s and from the 60s. Whereas Harry Connick growing up in the 70s and the early 80s only has really the 60s and the 50s and the 40s to pull from his sort of language, a little bit earlier. But that sort of tradition is much more linear straight through. It's interesting. And then he takes that and becomes this huge pop star, doing that thing. But this is it's almost like a different connection to the, it's still, I think, rooted in in the language of the music, but it's just there's a little bit more space between it. It's interesting.
Right. I think the corollary with Connick might be a little bit, say he had that Frank Sinatra influence you can hear a lot. But because I think he's always been connected with the jazz culture, that prism with which he brings that Sinatra thing in is kind of like Sinatra did as he moved along, where he started as and I'm no Sinatra expert, but from the recordings I've heard, the early ones, actually there's a quote, there's a reference to that in this video where it's very not connected, what you wouldn't be that's jazz, but then obviously Sinatra with Basie at the Sands.
He was doing it all too.
Yeah,
he was a pop star.
He learned that cult, he brought that into his thing, whereas Connick was kind of coming out. So it's almost like anything you do, you're not going to move that far from the jazz culture. But I think for the thing of is Laufey going to save jazz, and this whole question that keeps coming up, or is it Norah Jones, is are the fans that hear her do singing Misty and loving that? I think what the jazz people want to know is is she going to tell them, go listen to Ella Fitzgerald? I got this from Sarah Vaughan. Here, listen to these things. I mean, does she have to, that's not for her to do. And in any case, I think that should come directly from the music. I don't think that happens as much as we think it does.
No.
You know what I mean? Where it's they're becoming jazz fans. No, they're just becoming Laufey fans, which is fine. I mean, that's all she's responsible to do. Although, I don't know. Maybe not.
Maybe not. Well, let's keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'm sure Adam's going to make more salient points than we're ever making.
Well, and this, he does great because he brings in other people to make points. But this is to the point we're just talking about in terms of young people. And is jazz even for young people? So this is a little bit of a controversial quote that I remember Wynton saying, but this is a long time
listeners
ago.
Of jazz, consumers of the music, there is in fact an active hostility towards youth culture.
When I'm giving clinics, a kid will ask me, what about relating to us? What about appealing to us? And I have to tell them, look, adults don't appeal to children.
Laufey talks about this.
For young people to relate to music, they want to hear music made by people their age.
Jazz is a music that I think is best experienced live in a small club. The vast majority of small clubs, you have to be over the age of 21 to enter. TikTok.
So he gets into this whole thing that at first I was kind of okay. And then I'm well, that's kind of, what Wynton's saying is pretty harsh, but I'm also to be fair, I mean, Wynton looks like he's 25 years younger in that thing, and he probably is.
Yeah.
But he was already the director of, the head of Jazz and Lincoln Center, the founder of it.
Not sure what he's getting at, though, of like...
he comes back and shows some more quotes. It's more about like jazz isn't for young people.
Got it.
But I think maybe what a little bit of a disconnect.
But BAM is for the children. I'm just saying.
Exactly. But this is the thing. Like, also, I think to be fair to Wynton, he was talking more like there's a difference between a 23-year-old, 24, and I'm not sure Laufey is somewhere around there,
or even like an 18-year-old and a 10-year-old.
And exactly. It's like, are we making music that's going to appeal to a 13-year-old, in terms of jazz? Well, that is probably not what the target market of that is. And then you look at something like what she's doing, and it is. So is that going to connect a 13-year-old that loves Laufey's music to Ella Fitzgerald? Probably not.
This is where I think like this just becomes a lot of pointless thinking about stuff that doesn't ever matter for...
I agree.
I'm always selfishly relating it to making music.
Right.
And... getting a direct feed from the music that's in my heart, that's in my soul, out to people.
Agreed.
And this just doesn't help. It just confuses the matter, because then you start thinking about like, well, should I be making for this? Should I be doing this? It doesn't matter.
Right.
Doesn't
let me
matter.
jump to a part
Make what you love. Laufey or Wynton, do whatever you want. Honestly.
All right, we're gonna pull Adam off the brink here and get into something that I think I agree with you.
These are fun discussions, but as a player, it muddles the waters a little bit.
So this next part kind of gets into this mid-century pop idea, which I was super interested in, and some recordings that I really liked, and I think hits on a good thing here, an interesting point at least.
Identity. One of the questions that needed to be answered is, why is Miles Davis doing Someday My Prince Will Come part of this tradition? And why is Judy Garland doing Someday My Prince Will Come not part of the tradition? It's the same music, same melody, same harmony. Is it just because Miles Davis is black? Well, that doesn't seem right at all, because there are plenty of non-black musicians who've contributed to the culture of Black American
obligatory
music.
Bill Evans video.
Got a video coming up about this whole thing too.
Yeah. So I think that this is a valid and interesting point, and something that we think about, that most people in the GP, the general public, will associate music, kind of like we were doing earlier, with the repertoire. So it's like, okay, you're a singer singing Misty. Are you going to reference Ella Fitzgerald? Are you going to reference Sarah Vaughan? Are you going to do your own thing? Well, it doesn't matter. That's a jazz song. So you're going to be singing jazz because you're singing Misty.
Who cares, though?
Okay.
Now I've turned and I'm indignant to this whole subject. Like,
really?
What does it matter? Any of this? What does it matter?
Well, I think it doesn't matter for you and for me, but we're from a privileged place in our little walled garden here as creators of this music. I mean, as, not creators of the music, as participants in the ongoing creation of the music and like coming up with stuff. But I think for people that listen to the music and try to define it and be like, oh, I like jazz, or I like this, they do get caught up in like, this is what the repertoire, or it's in a jazz club, or it's at a jazz festival, so that makes it jazz. And I think it is an interesting thing to be like, hold on a second, nothing wrong with this or this, but is that really what it is? Is that part of the culture, so to speak?
I feel like, yeah, I understand why people dig into labels a lot, but to me, this is where they start failing us, because it is just a matter of finding a community of people who share the same values that you do about art or life or whatever. And that could be for music or sports or whatever, cultural, food. Like, we're just finding our community essentially, right? So to me, this is where, like, if you start to really dig deep into labeling things and then gatekeeping those labels, it really you're just adding a pile of crap onto your brain about what you should be doing and what you should be experiencing, as opposed to just like trusting your gut as far as when you hear something, like, what does it do to you?
Right.
I think.
I got you. Okay. So let's move on here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to kill your episode.
No, it's good. We want to move things along anyway. So he's got some great quotes from different people, but at this point, I was definitely thinking about Samara Joy, because I was like, wow, okay, we're dancing around, like, is she saving jazz, Laufey? But I'm like, I think I heard that come up as direct questions to Samara Joy. Now, Samara Joy, friend of ours, she was actually just in Open Studio a couple months ago.
She's amazing.
And, I think, but it's always like a dangerous thing to put that on anybody, especially a young person that's out here just doing their thing. But there is something, let me just jump to this and then we'll talk about it, because the reference did come up in here, which I was glad it would, because it would have just been a glaring omission otherwise.
By the way, this
closely
whole thing
collaborate
so far,
boom.
I feel like Adam Neely is just crushing this whole subject. Like he's doing a great job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a tightrope walk, and he's
greatest musicians like Wayne Shorter, for example.
Because jazz was struggling.
Like, I know this was done out of ignorance, but it is genuinely strange to show Esperanza Spalding, of all people, as an example of failure. Yeah. You know, but Esperanza is not the only savior of jazz. There have been many others. Like a couple months ago, for example.
Yeah. And the Grammy goes to Samara Joy.
Samara Joy won Best New Artist at this year's Grammys. She is another young Gen Z phenom, deeply inspired by Ella Fitzgerald and other great jazz vocalists of the past.
Samara Joy.
She, like Laufey, has done the circuit of late-night shows and has a beautiful singing voice that seems completely removed from the popular style of today.
So I saw today, my dear.
So good.
But most importantly, AI Patrick has covered her work.
That gets into some funny stuff. Okay, so we'll pause it right there for that beautiful visual. Okay, so my question to you, Adam.
Yeah.
Samara Joy.
Yeah.
Is Samara Joy jazz?
Yes.
Okay. So why is that such an easier, quicker? You might not think it's an important question, but like what is, I think, interesting, if not important, it's certainly interesting, is what are those like shared values for the community, for the jazz community that jump off for you? Because you're really good at like hearing stuff and connecting it, I think, in an organic way that's interesting.
I mean, first of all, again, labels don't really matter. But yes, I would consider her more in that, again, if we consider genres as a collection of people, not as a sound, right?
Right.
So if we can get out of genres...
And by people, do you mean artists and listeners and like...
Yes,
venues
actually,
and even...
I mean just human beings, like blips...
Who gather around something.
Blips of awareness here in our universe that happen in a very short time scale that share similar values, at least in a common time frame, right?
Yep.
And she fits into that community where she's at Newport Jazz Festival. She's got a trio that's swinging and improvising and certainly rooted in the foundations. There's a direct lineage that you can have vocally with what she's doing, her repertoire. And I realized that Laufey has a repertoire and her voice is beautiful, but she's dressing it up in a different way that is not so much connected with what you might call the community of people that you would define as jazz, right?
Right.
And it has nothing to do with age or race or where you are in the world or anything like that, but it is a shared set of values musically, artistically, and aesthetically that you can just, you know it when you hear it. You know it when you see it.
And I think that, and Adam Neely...
The way that the two would use bebop language, right? The way that there's a crowd singing bebop language because it's repeated every single time in the same place is not what would happen at a Samara Joy concert.
Yeah. Adam Neely brings up, he brought it up at the very beginning of the video, and he comes back to it, the gatekeeping of jazz and how he's saying he doesn't want to do that, but then he kind of does that, and he's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, or at least he has some pretty good self-awareness about that, I would say. And we talk about that not wanting to do that a lot, but I think that this type of discussion, it's not that we're saying Samara Joy is jazz and, Laufey is not jazz, but it's more about what are the shared values. Like, how do people come in? Because sometimes people come in and out. We were talking earlier about Nat King Cole, and it's like, is Nat King Cole a jazz singer? And I immediately was like, yes. And I think you were thinking more like, well, he became an incredible pop singer, more of a mid-century with pop, if that's a thing.
Nat King Cole is a jazz musician.
Yeah.
First and foremost. I mean, his playing is, he's in that tradition.
Yeah.
100%. Jazz singer too.
But if you hear him he
has made pop records.
Right.
That are not in that same tradition.
Right. And I think that's what's a beautiful thing about, I think, the way we're talking about this and addressing this issue, because normally we just run away from we're like, that doesn't matter. We don't even like jazz. But to be able to sort of define, or at least get into the areas of what the jazz culture is. What is the jazz community? More from like a standpoint of like, what are the things that we love, but also observing other people. Like, how do you define what a tribe of people around the world? Because that's what's such a cool thing about this.
Totally.
About anything. It's like, I'm a hockey, like you're a hockey person. I'm not a hockey person, but I love seeing like hockey people. I can see them around town. They might be wearing a blue shirt or whatever, but it's like, it's a shared culture. It's a shared values. It has its own language. And I'm not just talking about the musical language, a way of talking about it and stuff. And I think that somebody like Laufey you know, at a minimum, she's definitely going in a little bit into the jazz world with, you know, boo boo doo boo doo boo boo, which is cool. Like, we don't need to define and be like, she's only 4% jazz and she's not. Or to me, it isn't that interesting of that. But it is interesting to see, like, when people that have huge followings or are superstars. I mean, it'd be like if Taylor Swift goes on the Super Bowl halftime show and sings Misty. Like, that's going to be sort of interesting to jazz people.
Right.
You know, because it's like, wait, what the hell is going on here? Is that jazz? Or what does that mean for jazz? Like, what is that kind of cultural reference point? Probably won't mean anything. It's just singing a song.
It's not jazz, and it doesn't mean anything for jazz.
Right.
Yeah, but again, none of that really matters to me. And this is where, like...
Oh, I can tell.
I only have a point where I want to actually... like spend any energy with this, because it is so easy to get caught up. I think our minds, our primitive minds, right, that come from, like, you know, people call it the lizard brain or whatever.
Yeah,
we love categories and boxes, and we love to label people and things because it makes us feel safe and it makes us feel like, oh, we're secure because we now have a boundary on this thing.
Yeah.
But the truth of all existence is way messier and way grayer than any of this, right? There's like no severe boundary. And so I personally will start pushing back on just even thinking like this because of my own tendency to, like, I'll go deep on this and, like, really try to think my way through this and, like, okay, well, if I categorize this and then I can become this, and maybe if I'm going to do this, I should do it like this. And I've just found that's just like a creativity killer, man. That just, like, stops me in my tracks. It makes me not want to make stuff because I'm too worried about how it's going to, well, Charlie Parker like it? No one cares. Like, just make what is in your heart that you want to hear in the world. You know what I mean? And let it go. Let it be after that.
Right.
That's my goal. And I don't achieve that, but the more I spend time thinking about what is jazz, the more I want to, roll this piano out into traffic and just let it hit. And never.
On that note, please tune in next week as we do volume 2, part 2 of this episode, What is Jazz? A deeper dive.
I want to say, are we wrapping this up?
Yeah.
But real quick though, one thing with Adam's video that I think he nailed, that I haven't seen from the video, but I've seen other people posting clips from it, is the live at Emmett's place.
Okay.
That to me is like a great definition. So here's where like a younger jazz community actually exists. That is, they all know about Thelonious Monk. They all know about Charlie Parker. Right. And I think to be in that shared ideals, shared values, you have to have a set of common, basically like ancestors that we're all sort of, dipping from the well of.
Yeah.
And Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, like these people that have created what we're all inspired by.
Yeah.
And Emmett's place live at Emmett's place is a perfect example.
No, he does a great breakdown of that. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying this is where I think Adam nailed it with this video.
Yeah, we'll make that the last clip because I have one of those. And I would just say that I think I learned something from that. And Emmett was just here, a couple of weeks ago doing a course for us in the studio. And I didn't even realize that, and I learned this from the Adam video, that a lot of young musicians coming up have been watching Emmett's place. I mean, I knew that, but they're like talking about the different like that's becoming part of their shared experience for learning new stuff.
That's great.
And like, oh, did you hear Sean Jones did this thing? I learned the solo on that. And he brings up a thing of like, a lot of people be like, well, because of the pandemic, there's not as many places to play, or I'm not 21. We used to go through this when I used to go up to Cicero's. Like we were friends with the guy, one of the guys who worked there, and he let us in the back door because we weren't old enough, and I wanted to see P. Todd Williams. That's the age-old thing of like, how do you get in? I mean, Tony Williams couldn't get into the clubs to play because he was under 18.
His own gig.
His gig with Miles Davis.
Yeah.
But that's an age-old thing. But Adam Neely kind of turns that on its head and is like, well, if there aren't any clubs where you are, whatever, look what you do have access to. This sort of living new jazz club. And a lot of old people be like, well, that's not the same as being in there with the the old thing. But you know what? Everything's different now. It's like, let's move on.
No, this is what I'm saying kind of with the Laufey thing too. It's like how you do it is gonna change, right? But like the spirit of where it comes from is great.
And I believe, I don't want to speak, you can watch the whole video, but I believe Adam even kind of makes a thing to Laufey. It's like, well, if you do want to get, because I guess there was a clip on there where she was talking about playing at this jazz club in Japan, and she's like, this is actually my first time ever playing in a jazz club. And he's kind of like, wow. Like, but she was approaching it more from the standpoint of like, you hear the glasses clink, clink, and all the things that are around.
She was like, it's a feature. She was like, oh, this is going to sound like these old jazz records. Yeah, this is what I'm saying, man. Like, detached
and that's a valid
from
thing, but that doesn't connect you with the culture.
No, I mean, she obviously didn't grow up in basement bars in St. Charles where, there's clinking glass because people are throwing glasses at each other. And you are playing Mustang Salad. So, Laufey, welcome to the club. I hope you enjoyed the Blue Note Tokyo.
But it is interesting because, that is still most people's, and we roll our eyes, but maybe we shouldn't as much to like the GP, general public, potential jazz fans or whatever that come. I mean, most people, they come, especially if they're young, to a jazz club because they're trying to impress their date and they want to hear some clinkling of glasses and seem classy AF, and then the music they get there, they're like, wow, this is boring jazz. Just like on The Office episode when he said, let's have boring jazz for 3 hours,
Nope.
Well, no, that's
okay, I've gotten rid of all the Office clips and now it's just animals. Great.
All right, let's jump here to this Emmett's Place reference because I think I've got it on here.
This is like a 45-minute long episode?
Glasses clinking in the background,
there you go.
like forks and knives like scraping probably like against the steak or something against plates.
You can hear the same like ASMR approach to the recording that places you in the jazz club with Esperanza Spalding and Fred Hirsch on their record at the Village Vanguard.
It's a great record.
That's at the bar.
Clinks, conversations, which makes this comment by Laufey feel just a little bit odd to me.
And it sounds so like it really just transports you.
Hold on, wait a second. Transports you to when or...
Okay, let me just say this. I think this might be a little unfair, just in my opinion, in terms of, maybe there's a disconnect that he's showing there, but it's also like, let's have some grace on you, like young folks coming up. Like, shit is different now.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? And like, I've had great young artists, Sarah Hanahan, who's playing in my new band, and just different musicians that I've come into contact, especially through the Betty Carter Institute at Kennedy Center, Betty Carter Jazz Ahead, I should say. The general sentiment there is just like, we want to have what you guys had when you were coming up. And, it's a kind of a knee-jerk reaction I'd had before. It's like, well, just create it like we did. But the infrastructure is different. The things aren't there. We look at, it's always like we look at like, wow, but you've got YouTube.
By the way, by the time we were coming up, it was already different. I remember like moving to New York and a pianist who was a little older than me being like, yeah, I used to have like a gig for a month, 5 nights a week at a club in Long Island.
Kayla, put that visual back up again. We're going to watch. But look at this. This is almost two different genders. Look at how Adam's looking and how, there's that too. Like, let's not be like that between genders.
So Adam's a millennial. And as Gen Xers, we can say, Adam, welcome. We did this with you.
That's
You'll
right.
do this.
Now you're doing it. Look at that.
Eventually, Laufey will have a video looking at Gen, what is it, Alpha?
We don't know what's going on. But anyway, Adam, I did not set this up, but I did get lucky with that. Let's keep going.
Exactly. A different time, a different place, because, the Village Vanguard never went away. It's still in the West Village. It's still sold out like every night. You can go there right now and experience all the glamour of this music for yourself. And, you don't need to go to a different decade to experience this music. Young people never stopped making it. Better yet, if you're under the age of 21 and you're not in New York City, you can just tune into Live from Emmett's Place.
Welcome to Emmett's Place. How's everyone doing tonight?
Live from Emmett's Place is an ongoing live concert series held in the living room of pianist Emmett Cohen's Harlem apartment. The musicians are extremely talented. They play classic tunes, they joke around, and play music steeped in the jazz tradition.
Yeah, this is great. This is a great
It's old music played with modern sensibilities, and has garnered a huge following from people around the world, first exposed to, in my humble opinion,
was that Winard Harper?
Real jazz. And it's very popular.
He said, check mark, real jazz.
It's good. I mean, this is all a bit, obviously, tongue-in-cheek for that kind of stuff with the check mark, but it's true. So this is the community we're talking about, right? Yeah. This is like the genre. If a genre is a group of people, Live at Emmett's Place displays that group of people.
And it's not one is better
or
than
a particular
the other.
Group of people with a shared set of values and the same will. Like, yes.
And I love just that, like, the music's alive, not because of Emmett's Place, not because of Samara Joy, because of all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Laufey probably just a teeny little part of that, and that's okay. Or maybe it's more, maybe it's less, or whatever. But I think that I do. It's a great video, highly recommend it. Shout out Adam Neely, and I just think it brings up interesting issues. And I love the term mid-century pop. I can tell you're chafing at, but you know what? I love mid-century architecture. I don't know if you do. I grew up watching the Brady Bunch, sir.
I do love some.
You're a little bit young for that, so.
I remember the Brady Bunch.
You remember it.
It was in reruns.
Yeah, exactly. I was watching it in real time.
Are we done?
We are done.
This is the longest. This is the record, Caleb. I think we have the longest episode ever. Yeah.
Dude, you've had that feeling since we were 2 minutes in, though.
Did we solve any problems, Peter?
Well, I'm going to ask you one question. You're going to answer it yes or no, and then we're going to finish. Oh, no, we're not. Gala.
Gentlemen and ladies agreement.
Now, anybody who gets to this long ass episode to the end, you got to put what are they going to put? Look at him. We've lost him. Don't put gala. Put gala times 10. We're going to 10x gala. Gala times 10 because that means even if you've done it before. What is gala? What does that mean?
It means sorry, I'm all messed up. It means the gentleman and ladies agreement.
Yes.
So we make this video.
Yes.
Sometimes we make them shorter. Sometimes.
It doesn't matter. They're always free.
High quality.
Yeah,
and
not free.
Not free.
A lot of people think this is free. It is not free.
No.
What is the payment
You're
required?
on YouTube. You're watching. You haven't paid anything yet. So
you're about to.
What are they about to pay?
Bedhead.
Can I put a little score under here?
Please. You need to subscribe right away. If you're not on YouTube, go to YouTube. You don't have to watch us, but you need to subscribe. And you need to put in the comments. We got to know who's listening all the way to the end. We don't want to go in and look at the stats on YouTube. And nobody got time for that. So please go in and put comment. All you have to do is Gala, G-A-L-A, all caps, times 10. Until next time. You'll hear